Point one, internal states denote situation with a priority semantic argument. In more traditional terms, it's just semantic subject. What does it mean? It means that in traditional terms, external states are a situation without semantic subject, that is, without the asymmetry of subject and non-subject arguments. For example, I'm in Moscow now. This is a Davidsonian state, and this is an external state, which means that both the argument I, or Anton Цимерлинг, or the argument Moscow, or more exactly to be in Moscow, are just equivocal. Neither of these two arguments is the subject. So point number two here is that external SLPs, like Антон Цимерлинг is in Moscow now, can be quantified based on their spatio-temporal characteristics, that is, when and where, while internal SLPs can be only quantified on their semantic subjects. That is, that means that, say, a predicate like Anton is furious or Anton is sad can be quantified only for some set of Anton's states of mind. And checking this state, checking it logically, one can prove that the statement that in this at this moment Anton was furious, or Anton was sad is true or false. This can be checked logically. It's another story how this can be checked, but this is not a matter of psycholinguistics at any rate. So external SLPs denote sensually, that is visually or orderly perceived situation. Internal SLPs do not. This means that if I speak of external states, external SLPs, like Anton is in Moscow, this can be probably visually perceived if you get the picture, or if someone confirms that he sees me now in Moscow. While it's not quite evident how one could check a statement like Anton is sad. You could claim that you looked at him, looked at Anton, and found that his face is probably not shining with delight, or shining with delight, etc. But strictly speaking, this is not enough for verifying or falsifying the claim that X is sad or X is furious, X is delighted at this moment of time. It's an interesting question how internal states can be verified at all. But if we assume that they can, that means that the semantic subject might be the source of information concerning the truth value of the statement be sad or be delighted. So one further step is that a statement like Anton is sad can be verified with recourse to Anton's own reference to his sadness. That is, Anton is sad means I am sad, or Anton says I am sad. This is some linguistic metaphysics, but it's difficult to avoid it when we speak of internal states, internal SOPs. So I go further to the third part of my summary. This slide introduces the distinction of external SLPs. The abbreviation is SLP, low index external, and internal SLP, SLP int, SLP internal. They can be both primary and secondary. What does it mean? It means that primary SLPs are represented, and primary SLP ext and primary SLP int are represented by different word classes. Secondary internal states and secondary internal states are derived by semantic shifts. So the last point is that a language that retains a lexical opposition of internal versus external states generally blocks or restricts some type of semantic shift. For instance, modern Russian, a language I, to some extent, know and speak, severely restricts the derivation from external states to internal states for a large class of predicatives. But at the same time, it regularly licenses the opposite shift from internal states to external states. Probably, but I don't check this issue, the direction of semantic shifts is somehow linked with the number with the exact number of external and internal primary states in a language. So a peculiarity of modern Russian and probably of modern Bulgarian as well is that these languages have a great deal of predicates expressing the meaning of internal state. Therefore, these languages also need some kind of semantic shift for using the same lexical items in a different syntactic context, forcing the meaning of external state. So just some trivial remarks about the role of semantics. General linguistics is based on semantic theory and some shared conventions concerning the language structure. As early as in the 1920s, some great minds, including Lev Scherba and Alexander Pushkovsky, put forward important ideas that anticipated the Davidsonian taxonomy of 60s, 70s, and 80s. However, these Slavic linguists lacked explicit semantic theories. They were simply not developed at their day. And some of their claims must be critically assessed and revised. The meta-language, linguistic terminology is unfortunately redundant. For instance, the thing Lev Scherba called states is largely equivalent to SLP predicates. In the tradition of Greg Carlson, the term is dated with the 1970s. At the same time, similar terms are often misleading. For instance, a rival and a colleague of Donald Davidson the philosopher Kim introduced the term Kimean state. And Kimean states or Wendlerian state, just the same term used by Zeno Wendler in the 50s and 60s. These are different things, not the same as Davidsonian, Carlsonian, and Scherbian states. So linguistic is a rather bad science in the sense that it cannot prevent use of homonymic terms, and the term state unfortunately can be ambiguous. The term predicative in the Russian tradition was probably introduced by Alexander Isachenko. It refers to a class of words and probably to a class of primary state predicates. But the same term in the Western tradition, Western Anglo-Saxon tradition, primarily refers not to a word class, but to a class of grammatical forms. That's not the same thing. So, Davidsonian states. I just show you this slide, but since I already read it out, I just leave it for some seconds and briefly comment that later predicate taxonomies rooting in Davidson, for instance, the seminal work by Tatiana Bulygina, add to the distinction of spatio-temporal versus non-spatio-temporal things in another dimension, namely the distinction of dynamic versus static things, dynamic versus static situation. The main point is that Davidsonian states consist of homogeneous phases, while dynamic predicates do not. We cannot tell what differs Wendlerian states from other types of situation using Wendler's own terminology, since, as I already mentioned in the beginning, all types of Davidsonian predicates have an endpoint. So all spatio-temporal things have an endpoint, but the delicate thing is that Davidsonian states are homogeneous, while resultatives, actions, activities are non-homogeneous. This is also acknowledged by Olga Seliverstova and other theorists. Nowadays, it's probably a point of consensus, but it was a novelty in the 80s. So, turning again to Wendlerian and Davidsonian classifications. Zeno Wendler aimed at classifying verbs according to their spectral semantics. Three types of dynamic predicates, say activities, to run, to drive, versus accomplishment, his own terms coined by Wendler. That is the incremental or gradual predicate, to build a house. I'm in the process of building a house, and finally I reach the point when the house is built, and each act of building a house contributes to the final situation. Point 3 is achievements, that is predicates of instantious transition. For instance, I notice. I noticed a typo. That means that I haven't noticed, I didn't notice it before, but at some transition point, I noticed it. So achievements are basically the same things as resultatives, but taken in a different aspect. So Davidsonian taxonomies leave a possibility of classifying statives or states into different types. This cannot be done in Wendler's original classification, since he is mainly interested in dynamic predicates and just says that things that lack dynamic gradation, that is, things that do not consist of homogeneous phases, are called statives. That's his terminology. So the Davidsonian path leaves a possibility of classifying states in stative into different types, and Bulygin and Селиверстова distinguish spatio-temporal versus non-spatio-temporal situations. The latter are called свойства or качества in Russian. They're analyzed as names of properties abstracted from any referential situations. In the Russian tradition, it's customary to illustrate properties with one-place nominal predicates, that is, nouns or full adjectives or noun phrases in the nominative case. For instance, он мужчина, he is a man. Он сильный, he is strong. Он сильный мужчина, he is a strong man. Spatio-temporal statives are usually illustrated by sentences without full agreement, while мужчина and сильный can be used in argument or attributive positions, short adjectives or their predicative instrumental form. This grammatical class surely lacks from Bulgarian due to the absence of nominal case. Morphological case. In Russian, predicative instrumental is used only as part of the predicate. The idiomatic meaning confirms that such sentences are referential, that is, denote referential situations. 2a actually tells that X was not dumb except for some situation where he kept from talking. Он был нем как рыба. Literally, he was dumb as a fish. Sorry for the typo, I just noticed it. The example 2b implies that X not only was a man, but also behaved as a real man during his life or during some critical period of time. Он был мужчиной. So the idea that the absence versus presence of agreement on a nominal predicate encodes the distinction of spatio-temporal versus non-spatio-temporal things was first introduced by Lev Scherba in 1928. Scherba bluntly called spatio-temporal predicates състояния, which just is states, and non-spatio-temporal predicates качества, which means properties. And the same was done 50 years later by Greg Carlson. So I use the tags SLP and ILP for Scherbian states, which are identical with Davidsonian states, and ILPs are identical with Scherbian качества, that is properties. So I now turn to the mapping of SLP and the category of states. This is a special taxon, a special lexical grammatical category postulated by Scherba for modern Russian, with some stipulation that probably there is a trend towards forming such a lexical class in other Slavic languages as well. Yuri Sergeyevich Maslov tried to apply the Scherbian analysis to modern Bulgarian, and in an early paper of Maslov, dated by late 40s, he postulates the state category with some stipulations for modern Bulgarian. is the Scherbian analysis correct or not? I think that it's largely correct if we take the semantic side, but probably wrong if we discuss some parameters of grammar. But since my talk is mainly about semantics, I'll just say that I am a follower of the semantic theory by Scherba, and I think that it is correct. But nevertheless, I must say that Scherbian analysis is not modern, since Scherba just appeals to some intuitions, presumably shared by the native speakers. He says this is state or state predication. He doesn't provide any arguments, which means that any clever linguists, any sensible native speakers should have the competence which gives them the clue for diagnosing states from properties and from actions. This is unfortunately not so, and this is just trivial. And another thing not so trivial is that Scherba primarily spoke of primary states. That is, he was interested in lexical classes, not in semantic shifts. And the formal semanticists like Greg Carlson and Angelica Kretzer, who dealt with the same issues in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and later, were primarily interested in syntactic contexts forcing the SLP meaning. And this is a different thing. So Carlson and Scherba described the same type of predicates, but Scherba was interested in primary SLPs, while Carlson was interested in, say, secondary SLPs, not in word classes. So Scherba and his followers, including Viktor Vinogradov and Alexander Isachenko, believe that the core of the Russian SLP predication is represented by special non-agreeing word forms, selecting an animate subject and either licensing dative predicative structures, the abbreviation DPS, or a structure, the abbreviation is mine, but this is not a new idea. A structure with a nominative subject. For instance, someone is tipsy, on nevesele, or half drunk, or to translate it with an idiom, half of the bag. Я веселый, мне весело. So я веселый, that's ILP property. I am cheerful. Мне весело, I am having fun at this period of time. Point number 4, Вася и Катя были на веселе. I am showing this with a multiple subjects just to demonstrate that the link verb были agrees with a multiple subject, while на веселе doesn't show any agreement at any rate in morphology. We can claim that there is some deep syntactic agreement, but it's a different story. So no morphological agreement here, but morphosyntactic agreement on the link verb. So parts of speech and SLP. Scherba and Vinogradov argued that Russian has a new class of indeclinable words in the making, the so-called category of states, which stands for SLP. Neither Russian instrumental, predicative instrumental, nor Russian short adjectives are good candidates to be listed in or with category of states, since they are part of declension paradigms. So this is a weak point in the Sherbian analysis. However, the semantic side of his hypothesis is reliable. True indeclinable SLPs, like those in 3b and 4, invariably select inanimate semantic subjects, while presumable SLPs links with declension paradigms, like those into A and B, do not. I'll just show you the slide again. Here you have SLPs. Мне весело, они были навеселе, irrespective of the case marking on the priority subject argument. These are forms весело and навеселе, which lack agreement on the level of morphology. While the forms like я веселый have agreement. So two classes of Russian SLPs. The table is on this slide, and you see that the syntactic pattern is characteristic of forms with special morphosyntax. Therefore, the Sherbian analysis is largely correct if we just reject some extreme claims made by Sherba that everything tends to be listed with the category of states, then it will be okay. So no declension paradigm, obligatory animate subject. Declension paradigm plus minus declension paradigm. So we can now turn to the core of my talk, and since the listeners might be attentive and see the number of slides, I'll just tell them that I'm not going. I'll finish, I hope, in some 15 minutes. 15, not 50. So internal SLP versus external SLP. The basis subcategorization of states is the distinction of internal and external states. I already demonstrated this slide before, so just brief repeat. Internal states have a priority arguments, external lack it. External SLPs are quantified on the basis of parameters when and where something took place. This cannot be done for internal states. And at the same time, external SLPs can be observed while internal states cannot be observed. General semantics and or versus specific morphosyntax. The distinction of internal and external states is universal or should be universal. Meanwhile, it can be represented on a different level in the lexicon when external and internal states correspond to different word classes. I already introduced the labels primary SLPs and primary and secondary SLPs. But this distinction can also be represented grammatically. If adding or dropping some marker, for instance, adding an extra syntactic position or adding a special applicative morpheme, changes the semantic type of the SLP predicate. This gives us secondary external states or secondary internal states. It makes sense to focus on productive patterns linked with states, not on isolated verbal or nominal meanings. If I were forced to make a critical assessment of Donald Davidson's theory, I could only say that it was based on isolated predicate meanings, not on the grammar semantics interface as such. While Scherber was only interested in primary SLPs, that is, in word classes, while modern approaches must combine both insights, both directions of analysis, so we must tackle the problem both from the grammatical side and from the semantical side. But our colleagues, which make typological surveys and typological samples, can still stick to the traditional Davidsonian approach. That is, take some abstractly defined meanings like to know or to need, define it according to some existing descriptions of a world language, be it a Slavic language or some a politically incorrect exotic language, endangered language in the Oceania or Caucasus. Then if we find something which is translated as to know or to need, we can just explore some apparent grammatical cues of coding this meaning, that is, whether it has the default case marking or not, etc. Well, whether there is a special root, a special verbal root, a special nominal root for no, need, or whether there is a construction for expressing this type of meaning. So that's typology. I'm not doing typology here. An applicative model is, roughly speaking, on this slide. We have a predicative meaning like code. Capitalization shows that this is a rather abstract meaning. It's code in the room. If we add some applicative marker, some applicative operator, we produce a secondary meaning X feels code. Again, a typologist can compare languages which use the same root in the middle column and in the right column. This was, as far as I know, done by our colleague, typologist Maria Kopchevskaya-Tam. So one or two roots for the meaning to be code in the room or to feel code. These can be tested on large samples of languages. Another story is the derivation in the opposite direction, from primary internal states to derived, external states. For instance, if a language have some a regular way of expressing the meaning X is sad, then we can test whether this language has a path from this meaning to the meaning it is sad in the room or not. It's impossible to say it's sad in the room in English, but it's possible to say it is dreary somewhere. So again, a typologist can check such obvious things, whether a language applies to one root or different roots in the middle column and in the right column. So sorry, I dropped a slide or two slides. In some world languages, internal states are derived from external ones by adding a marker with a meaning inside, or as many languages show, in some body part, for instance, in the heart, or in many languages, it's not heart, by stomach. So in the stomach, I'm sad. So it means that I'm constricted in the stomach or something like that. So this is either functional metonymic derivation or a metaphor. This partly holds for Slavic languages as well. For instance, in Russian, on vyarosti, which means X is furious, we have a construction which follows the spatial metaphor. He is in fury. So the prepositional phrase on vyarosti, in fury, or in the fury, follows the locative pattern like on v gorode, he is in the city, he is in Sofia, he is in Moscow, or he has something on him. On surtuke, he is in a frock coat, he has a frock coat on surtuke. So on vyarosti and on surtuke just follow the same pattern. Therefore, Sherba just made a mistake when he listed predicates like on surtuke in the same sequence as on vyarosti. Indeed, on surtuke is a situation without a priority argument. Both human being and the frock coat are equivocal arguments, and they are necessary for their realization of the spatial meaning. This shift is facilitated by the default nominative case marking on the subject argument. Meanwhile, the Russian example does exactly the opposite to what the first bullet point appears to describe. Fury is in him. On vyarosti. Okay, this is a cognitive explanation, but I just stick to the syntactic pattern and ask the audience whether the argument on is the surface subject of vyarosti. Okay, you might be tempted to analyze is in a more deep level. My analysis is just very superficial. And what is not superficial is the meaning of, the idea of the semantic shift. So there is a semantic shift, and you can analyze it in terms of, say, cognitive inversion as the argument he and fury is in him. This is just an issue in meta-linguistic description. Thank you for the comment and for the criticism. So I have to state that the shift from external states to internal ones is substantially degraded with non-nominative subject arguments like "мне пыльно." Why is it bad? The intended meaning is "it's dusty to me." Probably because a native speaker of Russian doesn't perceive dusty as a sensation which can be personalized and intentionalized. That is, if someone states that it is dusty, that means that everyone will be tempted to give a consent. Okay, if you don't lie, it is dusty. It is semantics, as in what is syntax. Syntax or morphosyntax is like that predicatives like pыльно generally do not select dative arguments. An illustration is here. On Mikey, he is wearing a T-shirt. On в ярости. Again, I'm not offended, and I'm not so much troubled by the critical comment that on в ярости really means fury is in him or on him. Okay. I just state that in the left column we have external states, while in the right column we have internal states. A sentence like on в трауре is really two-way ambiguous. It can mean the same as on в траурной одежде, he is in mourning clothes, but it also can mean that he is sad. So again, this can be described in terms of semantic shifts. I just welcome the analysis in terms of, say, cognitive reversion. So sadness or mourning mood is on him. Okay, that's fine. On не в своей тарелке, this is an idiom with the meaning he is not, a literal meaning he is not in his plate, and the actual meaning is he is not at ease. Again, I must say once more that on не в своей тарелке can shift from the literal meaning he is not in his plate. Assume that there is some giant, huge plate, and a human being is placed inside this plate. It would be an external state, but it is conventionally analyzed in the meaning of internal state. So the only way recommended is to interpret on не в своей тарелке as he is not at ease. So the hypothesis is that if a language has mixed lexical grammatical coding of the internal and external states, the shift deriving secondary states must be asymmetrical. This is in fact partly tautological, since mixed coding means that there are primary states and secondary states. And if all states can be effectively made secondary, that means that we lack lexical coding. There are languages which resemble this option, but modern Russian and modern Bulgarian probably do not belong to this type and belong to the type showed here. So I just realized that the question came from Professor Derzhansky, the previous comment. Thank you, Ivan. So I just check more formal issues. Russian lexical predicatives pattern into two classes. In declinable forms like на веселе, tipsy, and some forms lack agreement at all, like boizna. Their grouping in one class is not felicitous, again, a criticism of Sherba, since the element from the first class actually show gender and number agreement. See the 5 features on the copula. Вася был на веселе, Вася is masculine, so был на веселе. Катя была на веселе, Катя is feminine, so Катя была на веселе. Вася и Катя, the plural subject forces the plural form on the auxiliary predicate, были на веселе. Contrary-wise, the elements like boizna which license DPS structures and case mark their subjects with a dative case, Вася было boizna, completely lack any agreement. And this contrast was first captured by Nikolai Pospelov in 1955, who claimed, and I think he was right, that dative predicative structures are just incompatible with subject-predicate agreement at all. So this is a very important correction of Scherba's analysis. Pospelov made a necessary concession to the traditional view that sentential arguments like finite clauses or infinitive groups, infinitive phrases are subjects if a non-sentential subject is lacking. In accord with the theories of his day, he assumed that sentential arguments always take their subject positions by DPS predicatives. This is probably dubious. I cannot go into details here, but there are some formal arguments against this view. He also analyzed such arguments as agreement controllers, which is just wrong, since Pospelov didn't provide a distinction between real lexical agreement and the so-called default agreement, that is a choice of some form, like third person or third person singular or third person singular neutrum, which is not controlled by any argument at all. So default agreement is not agreement. Therefore, we must reject these Pospelov comments to his correct analysis. So his analysis is correct, but some of his formulations are wrong. Predicative versus indeclinable secondary predicates. Мне было не по силам решить эти задачи. Мне были не по силам эти задачи. Мне было не по силам решить эти задачи. This is internal SLP, internal states. Эти задачи были мне непосильны. We have two arguments, the nominative and the dative one. So this is external SLP. But one cannot deny that the distance is rather short here. So in most cases, Russian allows the shift from internal to external SLPs, while the initial point of the derivation, whether it's internal or external, in the pair «мне было не по силам решить эти задачи» or «эти задачи были мне непосильны» is not quite obvious, since we can both proceed from the dative-oriented and nominative-oriented analysis of such structures. So, 5A, мне было не по силам решить эти 5B, sorry, as a structure with case copying. The complement непосильный copies all 5 features on its controller, the subject эти задачи, and shows the plural form. And the experiential argument can be expressed here both with dative and with a prepositional genitive. And another member of the pair just is different. So it's a very small, if any, lexical difference, but the subcategorization is different. So 5A is internal, while 5B is external. This is just repeated here, so I skip this slide and go to the final section of my talk, shifting the semantic type. Let's assume that there are primary and secondary states corresponding to different word classes. That was, as I just reminded you, the initial assumption made by Scherba. While secondary states are predicates shifting their semantic type in some syntactic contexts, either from external to internal states or in the opposite direction. That was, as I guess, the intuition of Greg Carlson in the 70s. So turning to Russian. Russian lacks the parameter of obligatory pronominal experiencer. And the same predicatives can be realized in dative predicative structures as internal states and as external states in sentences without an overt dative argument. That is, drop a dative argument and the interpretation can be different. So the shift from internal to external states is not forced by the dropping of the word subject position. That's important. Meanwhile, contexts where meanings like X из этого, X было из этого versus из этого are contrasted. Such contexts are indeed attested. So let's try to test whether primary Russian external states can be used in DPS sentences diagnostic of Russian internal states. I checked 50 lexical items, and the prediction that this was unlikely holds for 49 predicatives from 15. So 98%, so this hypothesis was correct. So all uses like мне пыльно proved to be irregular. This shift is indeed not licensed for the dative predicatives in most dialects of the speakers. Secondary internal states like мне пыльно, to me is dusty, are not completely possible, but well, you can experiment with such combinations, but they are not applied by other native speakers. That's the problem. So it's not completely out. That is, Russian grammar allows you to build such secondary internal states, but they do not belong to the core vocabulary of the dative predicative construction. So the grammar of yearning, to feel dreary, to be sad, to be dreary. I tested a sample with some 1,600 clauses containing the element tosklivo, dreary or drearily, in all positions. As predicatives, tosklivo, the tag is tosklivo 2. Agreeing adjectives, the tag is tosklivo 1, and adverbials, tosklivo 3. So the earliest examples are dated back with 1909. The ratio of DPA clauses basing with the subject element мне in the context position is 23. This just confirms that tosklivo belongs to the core vocabulary. That is a primary internal state. And this result is independently confirmed by the sociological experiment where 15 speakers from 18 confirmed that they use tosklivo with dative subjects. So the data are on this slide. Just the main thing, only one example with the agreeing adjective, tosklivo. It's not productive compared to the predicative tosklivo 2. And the adverbial tosklivo 3 is used nearly twice as frequent, too much as frequent as tosklivo 2. Syntactic context versus semantic type. So roughly and very politically incorrect, Greg Carlson against Lev Scherba. The sentences with tosklivo 2 containing at least one marker of the priority argument, either the dative in P or dative subject pronoun, or the phrases like на душе, на сердце, in the soul, in the heart. Unfortunately, Russian doesn't have the phrase в животе, as an applicative marker, adding the priority argument, but otherwise the semantics is similar. So I claim that if we have at least one marker of the priority argument, these are internal states. So they take more than 50% from all uses of тоскливо 2, that is the predicative тоскливо. Semantic versus syntactic argument. It's interesting whether the group like to have something in one's heart is treated as a surface subject. No, it's not treated as surface subject in Russian, since it forms a complementary distribution with overt sentential argument. So Russian has sentences like «Мне было тоскливо to на душе» and «Мне было тоскливо выходить из дому». You can, of course, drop the «мне» extension. That's not critical here. But what is critical that you cannot use sentences like «Мне было тоскливо на душе выходить из дома». So either «на душе» or «выходить из дома». They do not live together. Here you have this in the table. So «на душе». It's just amazing that corpus grammar can give so good results for a pretty formal hypothesis on complementary distribution of syntactic expressions. Autoreferentiality. Yes, in most cases we find the first subject pronoun мне. In the contact position, 48%. In all positions, 6-1, almost 62%. This confirms that тоскливо 2, like most Russian dative predicatives, is autoreferential. That is oriented towards describing, towards describing the internal state of the speaker. So, тоскливо 2 as external state, circa 52 examples of the sample follow the pattern somewhere is тоскливо, it's dreary in some location. So, some examples show that the speakers are aware of the fact that тоскливо 2 has side uses as internal as well as external state. The examples come both from ordinary people or from great authors like Fyodor Dostoevsky. That's not material for the analysis, but just such illustrations exist. The adverbial тоскливо 3. What is it? It's just a hidden predicate. It provides, the predicative provides the basic context. This is my claim for the analysis of the adverbial тоскливо 3. So the question is whether the adverbial really has the meaning of internal states reconstructed or the meaning of external state. Both options are possible. And in some cases, two types of animate participants are available. So a situation described by тоскливо 3, that's adverbial, тоскливо 2 this predicative, are linked with two kinds of animate participants as semantic arguments. They can be both overt and implicit, that is covert. The subject of states can be covert, but is sometimes reconstructed unequivocally. The observer generally remains covert, sorry for the typo. If both of them are available, the sentence containing a stative predicate becomes ambivalent. For instance, на противоположной стороне улицы тоскливо мерзли 3 милиционера. On the opposite side of the street, 3 policemen froze drearily. The example describes a situation where some X, describes 3 policemen, is or are freezing outdoors. The first interpretation, the covert argument, is the observer. The situation is visually accessible and can reflect the perspective of the observer who stands somewhere on the opposite side of the streets and looks at the policeman. It was a dreary sight to look at the policeman freezing at the street. So that's one interpretation. So in this case, it would be external state. And here, covert argument as X. A sentence like 7 could also express the viewpoint of the freezing policeman. Dreary policemen were freezing outdoors. So a more explicit form, it will be «На улице мерзли милиционеры, и им было тоскливо». Again, the initial sentence 7 на противоположной улице, стороне улицы тоскливо мерзли 3 милиционера. So both readings are available, and in this case, the sentence is two-way ambiguous between external and internal state interpretation. So that's all, and I just repeat the conclusions. For the sake of simplicity, I assumed that the classes of primary, external, and internal states are diagnosed in Russian based on a single feature. Primary internal states license dative predicative structures, while primary external states without a nominative argument lack such uses. And that this prediction holds for sentences with the verb position of a dative argument. Russian primary internal states correlate with secondary external states derived by the regular semantic shift. And in sentences without an overt dative argument, the diagnostic of internal versus external states is to some extent possible, except for the ambivalent context. And this can be done both for sentences where we have a real surface predicate that is the predicative, and a qualitative adjective, which is a hidden or reconstructed predicative. Thank you. That was all.
И ние благодарим от все сърце на професор Цимерлинг за изключително интересната лекция, която ни потопи в едно много широко представяне на проблематиката. Бяха направени широки препратки, също така много важни изводи и съпоставки.